When you have fully activated task attention, when your regulator has done its work, then you experience first a sense of clarity of focus. You are able to see clearly what to work on now, so you can maximally focus on that. But then you also experience even deeper that sense of silence, that the chatter has diminished. And finally, you experience a sense of smoothness, that it's like your attention is a liquid that can flow, and you can put it into the step and it's just going to flow through the task.
Before we get started, if you enjoy these episodes, you might want to check out more at OptimalWork.com. Our website offers unique content, tools, and exercises to help you thrive at work and beyond. We have an in-depth masterclass covering our entire theory of growth, daily recommendations for personalized advice, and a platform to help groups and organizations learn and practice optimal work together. You can get a free trial at OptimalWork.com. Now let's start the episode. Hey, this is Sharif, here with another episode of the Optimal Work podcast, joined by Dr. Kevin Majors. Kevin, good to be back here with you again.
Hey, Sharif, thanks for having me back.
Yeah, Kevin, excited to cap off our Engines of Enthusiasm series with a look today at the cortex and attention. So this is also a great segue into our next big series, which is going to be on some of the new stuff on motivation. So excited to set the stage for that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, wonderful.
Well, let's see. I think maybe it would be good to just recap, because we've talked a lot about attention over the years, and I think what we're going to do in this episode ties a lot of that stuff together with the septum and meaning and striatum and effort. So maybe it would be good for us to start just by recapping, or diving into attention, and we're going to be talking about task attention and default attention and just lay the groundwork there.
Sure, that sounds great. And the way we think of these engines, that when they're all running together, that's when we experience enthusiasm for what we're doing and enthusiasm for the people we're with and the life that we're living. So by learning how to address these engines one by one, we're actually setting ourselves up for the best life. We're setting ourselves up for a life where we can actually be giving our best to those around us. So this is really, I think this ties into the deepest source of meaning we can have, because that meaning engine, that it be love and service, is the fundamental engine. And that, when it's running well, will support the other two. And then we talked about the effort engine and what it means to get that running well and to protect it so that it can do its job fully, so that it can then also be supporting the others. And now we get to the final piece, which is the attention engine and how to make sure that that's online. And in some ways, that is the capstone, because that's where our experience lives. With our attention, we're either focused on the world inside ourselves, which particularly happens if we are lacking meaning or lacking the desire to put in effort. We get more stuck in ourselves and in our own heads. And that's really reflected up in the cortex. Or we can be attending to the people and to the work at hand. So that's kind of what this is about, how to get to that point.
Mm-hmm. And maybe, Kevin, just to draw a distinction or get clarification, I think we often associate focus with, attention on things and people and reality. And then with attention inside the head on ourselves is more of the distraction mode. I'm just wondering, when you sit down for a time of work and you're working and then you realize, okay, I don't want to do this. This is tough. And then you get distracted by the phone, social media, email, whatever it is. Is that part of what we're talking about? Because your attention is not exactly focused inward, but it's just not on the correct external object. So how does that fit into what we're talking about here?
Yeah, it is certainly the things that distract us are self-referential in some way. And the background attention is where our own narrative lives. So that's where the storyline is. And so, and the more we are living in inside our own kind of model, in our own world, um, then the more affinity we have for things that reinforce that. And very often, the things that we find that are entertaining or the things on social media, they are all reinforcing a certain kind of understanding we have of ourselves and this kind of narrative that we keep up. They're more about the model we have than they are about reality itself. And then reading things or experiencing things that kind of confirm that. So I think I do think that cheap dopamine, the things that give us the hit that makes us like, that hooks our attention, those things it's always in some way self-referential. Whereas the deeper source of dopamine is the dopamine that comes from the septum. So when the septum is online and love and service is the main motive, that actually then drives our ability to forget about ourselves completely and to put our attention wholly into what we're doing. So that sets the stage for being able to really get out of ourselves. So I think when more people are dominated by distractions, they're not really getting out of themselves. In some ways, they're even more locked in, and it's like an echo chamber.
Hmm. That makes a lot of sense. Now, Kevin, I think it would be helpful to get to the parts of the brain that are behind this. So we've done episodes on this, even series on this in the past. The task attention, task positive network focused on the present moment and the here and now, and then the default mode network focused on this kind of the ourselves. So maybe I don't know if you want to fill that picture out a little bit, just to help kind of again lay the groundwork here.
Yeah, because what it means to optimize the attention engine is to be able to deploy fully your task attention and to quiet as much as you can your default attention. So in the past episodes, we talked about this as the anti-correlation. And you can think of it like a seesaw. It should be that as task attention goes up, default attention just goes down. No, it doesn't go completely away because we still want it to be readying our associations for the next thing we're going to work on. That's a really important service. Turns out that doesn't take a lot of effort if it knows what you're about to do. So now when you're thinking about that, you might think the two main things then to focus on for optimizing this attention engine is then how do I activate my task attention and deactivate my default? But there's a missing piece. And that missing piece, if you're thinking of a seesaw, it's the fulcrum point. So that is another region that is called the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. Technically, it's assisted by something called the anterior cingulate. But at any rate, you could think of it as the regulator. That regulator is precisely what does the work of activating task attention and in the background, deactivating default attention. So everything about optimizing this engine of attention comes to activating this part of the cortex. So that's what we'd be focusing on here.
Hmm. Wonderful. So in the past, in the past couple episodes, talked about how the septum influences the striatum. So having meaning kind of prepares you to be willing to exert effort in order to, attain that meaning or get closer to it. Uh, and, in terms of the septum and meaning, we talked about threat mode versus purpose mode. So how does that downstream affect the cortex and whether we're preparing ourselves to focus on the present moment or to be lost in our thoughts?
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. So the septum sends dopamine to the striatum. So if the striatum is in a low dopamine state, which means it's going to be more automated, more triggerable, more rote, uh, it's that way because of the septum. It's not getting the dopamine support that it needs. But interestingly, as the septum does that, through this, it's called the ventral tegmental area, as it does that, that same area sends dopamine directly to the cortex also, and to this part of the cortex that we call the regulator. So that determines then the amount of dopamine tone that this regulator has to do its work. So love literally fuels attention in exactly the same way that it fuels effort. And it does it through just this very elegant part of the brain. There's another region that does that. So the striatum, when it's in this high dopamine mode, and what you can think of that as, when your striatum is all online, you're thinking like, okay, I am ready to begin. So there's this ready willingness to engage the task. You experience it as a strong desire to begin. So nunc cepi, now I begin, is a wonderful motto. Along with vale la pena, it's worthwhile to put in the effort here. Because when dopamine is high in the striatum, the cost diminishes in its perception and the benefits are clearly seen. Then the striatum also boosts the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex and these attention networks, allowing your regulator to then activate task attention fully. So when you have this state then where now you are ready to begin, the mind can actually go quiet. So sometimes I like to think of it that the gift that the septum gives to the striatum is desire. And then the gift that they together give to the cortex is silence. And and that inner silence is a sign that in fact you have deactivated default attention. The mind is quiet. So when you have fully activated task attention, when your regulator has done its work, then you experience first a sense of clarity of focus. You are able to see clearly what to work on now, so you can maximally focus on that. But then you also experience even deeper that sense of silence, that the chatter has diminished. And finally, you experience a sense of smoothness, that it's like your attention is a liquid that can flow, and you can put it into the step and it's just going to flow through the task. So clarity and silence and smoothness, these are all the hallmarks altogether of what it means to have full intensity of focus or of attention. And that intensity is your attention engine working at its best. And those are also the three hallmarks of flow, the experience of flow. But I think sometimes it's difficult when you talk about flow because people might get caught up on, am I in flow? And do I ever have flow? But most people can relate to the idea that they can achieve clarity and silence, and then maybe even that sense of smoothness as they go from one step to the next. That's close enough. Let's call that flow.
Before we continue, a brief message. If you're benefiting from these discussions, please take a moment to hit like and subscribe. Doing so helps us to reach more people. So you're not just learning, you're also helping others to discover a path of growth and flourishing. Thanks for your support. I guess just to clarify, so what we're saying here is that this kind of internal friction that comes from distraction and the default mode and being inward focused arises because like there's a lack of meaning or a lack of willingness, and those are the kind of upstream ones, the septum and the striatum. They're not switched on yet. So in a way, if they're not switched on, your brain kind of knows that, and it's looking for reasons, looking for motivation, and that's what you experience as, I guess, mind wandering or daydreaming or things like that. Is that
Yeah,
is
so
that
if
what's
you start
going on?
you'll notice that as you sit down to work, it's like, oh, wait, what if this doesn't work out? Or maybe I should check my email right now. Or I just don't feel like doing this. Or I wonder how long this will take. You start to have all of these. Those are like narrative type questions, clearly coming from the default attention. But there, the trick is to see that it's in fact the regulator that needs more support. And you can deliberately activate the regulator, but you can also ensure it's getting the dopamine and then the other network support that the striatum gives so that it can do its job really well. So so the first check is like, is my heart really into doing this? Do I see why this matters? Interestingly, just reflecting on the meaning of what you're doing is a way of deliberately activating the regulator. So the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex will light up as you start to assess again the meaning. So it's interesting. It's under voluntary control, like everything in some way in the upper cortex. Uh, or like, am I in fact willing to pay the price here? Maybe there's an aspect of this that is awkward, and there's something there that could be triggering dynorphins. Well, we know that that puts the striatum then at risk of defaulting into automated avoidance. And you have the deepest way of activating the striatum is an unlimited willingness to pay the price it takes to do this at your best. That's the essence really of generosity. So to have this generous disposition that the cost in fact is worth it. But reflecting on willingness also activates your dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. So if you're fully willing, you're fully ready in that sense, you see the meaning of it. This is how you can use your dorsolateral prefrontal cortex to make sure the other two engines are turned on. These other two engines are deeper in us. So, like the septal engine, to know it's really running, you actually have to feel the affection in the heart. That's the best way of doing it. Actually, the quicker way is, am I cheerful right now? Typically, when we're cheerful, we're not in threat mode in the septum. And so having a cheerful disposition in our work is a great check you can have that, okay, yeah, I have the right positive attitude towards this. But especially if you can feel the desire to get started. So that's the gift. And then you can start to feel the silence as you're ready and willing to engage. So those are so that when we are checking the other two engines, we're actually using our dorsolateral prefrontal cortex in part to do that. The other things that we talk about, like setting a time that you're going to finish, having a stop time for the effort, activates your regulator. Just thinking of the steps you're going to do or creating the steps reliably activates this regulator region. Right? So many of the things we talk about in doing a golden hour already are very built in to do that. Even we have an OptimalWork in the golden hour, a perimeter checklist. But going through a checklist and setting a perimeter, actively turning off things, has been shown, if I've read, to actually activate your regulator. So all of this, when you're thinking about your way of paying attention, trying to protect it in advance, trying to support it with meaning and effort, all of that is actually activating this regulator region. And so that gets us ready then, that when we sit down to work, all that chatter can just start to quiet. I think one of the things that I often see in my practice is that when people have a worry or even an obsession or something, or they're ruminating about some problem, they think that the problem, like the content of it, is the real issue. And I see the status of the regulator as the real issue. No, that can sound really impersonal, but in fact, it's freeing in some sense because it lets us see we don't have to solve all the issues. A beautiful fact of this, how it works is even delaying when you're going to think about something is made easier when you've activated the regulator. So you can say, okay, after I'm done with this golden hour, then I'll attend to this concern. And you'll notice that the default attention is able to wait because you've given it a plan. You've given it a prediction that they can use. It's like, okay, we will deal with that at a different time. It makes it much easier then to get it off your mind.
So, Kevin, I guess what we've been focusing on here is preparing your mind for a given task. And of course, the golden hour is very focused on how do you prepare your mind for an hour of work. That's kind of like our bread and butter. What does this tell us, this understanding of the neuroscience and the psychology? What does it tell us about how we should stay engaged with a task? So we've covered kind of the first few minutes before starting. Then once we actually launch in, is it just the preparation kind of that's it, or are there any things we can do as we're going through the task to make sure that all of these systems kind of stay online?
Well, one thing for sure is, in a way, celebrating completions in your mind. So, which activates the regulator as well. So to check off the box and see okay, I'm making progress on this thing. that assessment of progress is a great way of keeping it active. So as you see the progress you're making, you start to feel more pulled to complete the task. And we know that like the closer you get to completing, the more that you can feel that pull. So when we begin a task, we're launching in with a certain reservoir of effort. But every time, we complete a milestone, which is what steps are, we get a renewal of effort. And we also can see that if we really believe in what we're doing and we think this is a real service, then we've actually done a great thing and we've provided a real service all along the way. The other thing that is really important is to never deliberately divide your attention into two or more. So never to work in parallel tracks, but only to work sequentially. So because working in parallel is going to fragment your attention, and it's going to result in the reactivation of the default network. Because now there's way too much for it to predict, and it's going to be working very hard. Multitasking and this kind of parallel work tracks that you're doing at the same time are the best way to produce bad tired. As we talked about that in the past. But unitasking, especially as you're able to tune up the task attention when it's fully tuned and not in friction with default attention, is very efficient. So you can actually work, longer with stamina by working only in steps. So those would be two things I would think of.
Yeah. Kevin, a while ago, we did an episode on the cloud of unknowing, which is like, how do you approach a task that's big and it's unclear exactly? You're kind of going into the unknown. It's a task you haven't done before, or you're researching a question that's you don't obviously know the answer to in advance. So it can feel like it's hard to make steps for it in advance. We talked about keeping your eyes on the ideal to guide you, as opposed to having specific outcomes that you can really check off. So I guess that fits into what you're talking about here, is maybe you don't have steps you can check off, but
It's a great question. Yeah, and in fact, wouldn't it predict then that if you don't really have steps to check off, that regulator won't be so activated, so you're not going to achieve the same seesaw, and you're going to have proportionately more default attention on board? And the fact is, that's exactly right. And that is not a bug, it's a feature. So the regulator isn't there to simply shut off default attention. When the work requires it, for creative, exploratory work, you actually need proportionately more default attention involvement. Because that's where the model lives of the world. That's where you're able to have it more clear and rich associations. So what task attention gives you is a rich experience of the present moment. But the default attention has a more rich kind of model of whatever you're working on. So so it's true that creative work and exploratory work and many forms of research require more discipline in a sense, because they require the default attention not just to be throttled down, but to actually be working, but it's still now in synchrony and there's no friction. So task attention and default attention are only in friction when the default attention is pulling it off task or in many directions at once, like with multitasking. So what then would be the best way to make sure that you're staying on target? So, well, first go back to the meaning. Are you operating out of fear? If you're in threat mode while trying to do creative exploratory work, it becomes way harder. If you have an attitude of cheerful, curious playfulness, you can think of those kind of qualities that you want to have. And then to enjoy the work you're doing, creative exploratory work can be very deeply enjoyable. You probably still want a time box. So you probably still want a stop time, at least so that you'll have a chance to reassess, is this going in the right direction? So this is actually what a lot of my work is like in working with people. Because when you're working with people, it's the cloud of unknowing. But you have a sense of what you're trying to accomplish. And you have a clear sense of what a meaningful win would look like. Okay, if you have that sense of what would be the most meaningful win here, you have the septum and the striatum on board, because meaning is the septum and win is the striatum. So I think that's all you need for really creative exploratory work. And if you can break that meaningful win down into smaller wins, so much the better. But you might not be able to. But it certainly won't be algorithmic. And so yes, you won't fully activate the regulator, so you won't fully turn off the default, but that's okay.
Wonderful. Kevin, well, I mean, we've covered a lot of good ground here, and we're kind of closing in on our stop time here. So I don't know if you have any final thoughts you want to leave us with here.
Yeah, well, maybe we just thinking of how that the gift that the septum gives is desire, and the gift that the striatum gives is silence, so you can be totally engaged. But the gift that the cortex gives to the others is love. Particularly as you are attending to the people that you love, the septum drinks that in and responds even more. As you are focusing on a service you love providing and the people that you're serving through it, the septum drinks that in. And the more it does that, the more desire you have, and then the more silence you have to attend to it. So there is a virtuous cycle here that the cortex is where love actually becomes presence. You're fully present to people. And that full presence to people then more deeply ignites love. That is the essence of every virtuous cycle. There's a motive of love and service that's always deepening. It's also the essence of any good work and even of prayer. Desire, silence, love actually are a path. And so maybe in our next one, we'll go into how do you make sure that virtuous cycle is happening, and to more deeply understand what is enthusiasm and how do we carry it out in our life.
That sounds perfect. And that gets into another big topic, the start of and we'll kind of lay the stage for that.
Wonderful.
Okay. All right. Well, Kevin, thanks so much
Yeah.
for joining today.
Thank you, Sharif.
All right. We'll be back. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode. If you enjoyed our conversation and you're looking for more in-depth guidance, check out OptimalWork.com, our unique platform that delivers content, tools, and exercises to help you thrive at work and beyond.